Hello and welcome to Heilman Haver, the Stage and Screen podcast, coming to you from Casa de Quinn Studios in beautiful Port Orchard, Washington. I'm Greg Heilman.
And I'm Matt Haver. We're two local actors looking to hone our craft by exploring the best in local theater and on the big screen. Each week we'll bring you entertainment news and views, celebrate classic Hollywood, enjoy cocktails with a Tinseltown twist, and interview talented local actors and directors.
Today we welcome to the show actor, light and stage technician, and stage manager, Adrian De Groot.
Hey, thanks so much.
Adrian has been active in Kitsap County Community Theaters for over 20 years. He first appeared at the Performing Arts Guild of South Kitsap in The Foreigner in 1998. Since then, he's been involved in over 30 productions as an actor, light and sound tech, and stage manager. When he's not indulging in theater, Adrian holds down his day job as a programmer and is graced with a wonderful family. His wife of 24 years and 3 kids are very supportive and even volunteer in the lobby and hospitality roles at the Bremerton Community Theatre. As an actor, Adrian gravitates toward fun and character parts, especially those with accents, including Agatha Christie's Appointment with Death, where he got to work with your two humble hosts. And you and I worked recently on Go Back for Murder.
We did. Yes.
Also requiring an English accent in this case.
It feels like a lot of shows end up really employing the standard British accent, or, you know, the Queen's British or whatever. Yeah, it's a fun one, and it's one that is instantly recognizable as saying, this is set away from home.
Right. Now, you've done a lot of work at BCT, and you're one of the few people in our community who are actively involved in a show at BCT.
That's right. I am running lights for Shout, the mod musical. It's being directed by Rana Tan, and it's got 5 amazing women who are. It's a musical, and they're doing the singing and the dancing, and they do such a good job, especially because we don't have an open date yet. We have to wait until Phase 4 before the Bremerton Community Theatre can open up their main stage. So, in the meantime, we're just trying to keep as sharp as possible with the show, and that includes a weekly full run rehearsal, which I get to be a part of.
Wow, it keeps your chops fresh.
It does. It helps a little bit.
Yeah. Well, one thing I know we're gonna talk about accents, but I just wanted to say that when we worked on Appointment together, and I remember even in auditions, you switching back and forth between the English accent that you did in the show, the French accent. There's probably 2 or 3 different accents, I think, within like a 10-minute period, just switch from one to the other, which I thought was super impressive.
Oh, thank you. It was a lot of fun. I'm sure I'll talk about it later, but there's kind of a little bit of a technique to some of that. But yeah, it's what I enjoy doing.
Awesome.
So you're working on the technical side of the show currently at BCT, but are best known as an actor here in this area. So what inspired you first to take up acting, and when was that exactly?
It's actually funny. It's before my wife and I had kids. We were a host family to Japanese exchange students. It turned out that one of the other host families was active in the local theater in the old Port Orchard Performing Arts Guild, or PAG. And so they managed to get all of us into a show. And it was a little teeny tiny show at this little teeny tiny hole in the wall. It used to be above the Dragonfly Theater in downtown Port Orchard. So we all went, and at the beginning of that show, they announced auditions for the next show. And I saw it, and it was kind of fun, and it sounded kind of neat. I had never done anything like this in college or high school or anything, but it sounded kind of fun. And so I auditioned, and that next show happened to be The Foreigner, and that was that.
You were hooked.
I was hooked.
See, I can't imagine that you didn't act your whole life.
No, I come from a family that has a lot of musical and art background. So my father was in symphony, New Orleans Symphony, Boston Symphony. My mother has a music major. So it felt like it skipped a generation, but I guess when it came along to it, it actually didn't. And I just happened to, the stars happened to align, and I happened to get this part, and it was fantastic.
Well, taking up acting, so I guess you could say later than some, from the perspective of doing the accents, are accents something you've always played with in your life? Did you just pick that up when you started acting, and then what was kind of the first accent that you attempted on stage?
I've always enjoyed them. They're always fun to listen to. I always enjoy hearing them. The first one actually was my first show. It was, I consider it kind of an unofficial accent. It was the character that I played in The Foreigner was Ellard. The first time I ran Foreigner. Ellard is, for those who haven't seen the show, he is kind of he appears to be a dullard. The show itself is kind of set in the South. So I kind of had to have a slower voice, and there were some very specific things I said, like fall work, 2 parts. And so I did this, but I didn't have any sort of help beyond what was in the script itself. Typically, and actors usually see this, especially with character parts, there are certain words that in the script they like to put phonetically, or they like to have very specific spellings to indicate that they want it said a certain way. Mm-hmm. So they did that with Ellard, especially for some of the laugh points or the humorous things that he would say. The very next show I did was Out of Order, and that's a show set with British. With a British accents for most people. And that was actually the first one where I got a hold of a tape. Katrina Baxter Hodiak, or Katrina Lenore, she's been mentioned on the show before, wonderful person. She had this cassette tape. It was actually, it's called Acting with an Accent by David Alan Stern. So he's a professor of linguistics, and he specializes, one of several who specializes in making these training tapes for dialects. And I took to his process it was very natural for me. And so that was the first show where I actually got to do a British accent. And it may not be precise, or it may not be exact in Britain itself, but it does what it's supposed to do. And it brings the audience to a general location. And it's really more about that than it is about giving a specific exact accent. So Out of Order was the first I would consider trained or coached accent that I did.
Okay, we got to do the rest of the show in British accents. So going back to the first accent you attempted, you said you don't consider it quite an accent. And that brings us to our next question is, what is the difference between an accent, a dialect? You mentioned that there were some little colloquialisms. We'll throw that into the mix, mm-hmm. As far as laugh points, etc. How do you define the difference between those 2 things, dialect and accent?
Sure. Well, I feel like I'm sure there's an official definition somewhere, but I kind of feel like the distinction is in a dialect is kind of a subset of a language. So I would consider something like a Texas dialect or a Southern dialect. I would consider something that approximates a character whose English is a second language. I would consider it accent.
The way the voice sounds, but the words you use and some of those more cultural things from a specific region.
Phrasing, etc.
Sure. And a colloquialism, I would consider define a character more. As a previous example, my character of Ellard. If you get into the Southern accent, well, not everybody talks the same way, but Ellard specifically said things like fall work. So he had a very specific way of saying very specific words. And I would consider those perhaps a character colloquialism. So as opposed to, it's not really a dialect because it's a one person. Mm-hmm. So again, we're kind of dialing in.
You referenced the program that helped you learn dialects mm-hmm. to begin with and accents, and you said the word tapes.
Yes.
So you're dating yourself.
Yes.
We remember tapes, all of us around this table, except maybe for associate producer Quinn.
Yes.
Are those types of systems and programs still available?
Absolutely.
In a different media?
Yes.
I assume.
Yeah. I actually, I did a little bit of looking up. I'm sure that David Alan Stern as a specific publicist is available still. Actually, if you go on to Amazon.com, you will find a couple different options. I noticed one of the top authors was Paul Meier, Meier. That one has CDs, and they also say that a new version of it's a book and as an accompanying book, it has streaming audio. So absolutely you can find other options if you're looking for a specific coach. Now, additionally, if you prefer to just try it yourself, there is a website. It's called dialectsarchive.org is the website address, and it's IDEA. It's the International Dialects of English Archive. This is a site. It's a free site. It's amazing. You can find English dialects and accents from all around the world, and you can actually dive in to sub-dialects and you hear different people saying the same phrases or saying the same general story. And so you can really dig into some of those differences and changes, and it's amazing. Yeah, exactly.
So take the British Isles, for example. Irish, Scottish, Welsh, Cockney,
Yeah.
Londoner, microcosms.
Yeah, I used it for Appointment with Death. So in Appointment with Death, it was specified in the script that I had a North English accent, which is different from your standard British. So one of the things that I did, I happened to have a tape, so I listened to the dialect tape for that. But then I went on to this IDEA site, and I actually listened to some examples because it's difficult. It's not Scottish, it's definitely not Irish, but it's not quite English either. There's a cadence difference to it, and it hits in a different part of the mouth. So having that was a really great resource to be able to figure that accent out finally.
Cool. Well, we will post those links that you gave us at the show notes so that everybody can access those and can see those. I remember I auditioned for Mousetrap. It was the first show I ever did with an English accent, and then I did Mary Poppins after that. And I kind of went in it completely blind. I'm just using what I've seen on TV and having known some English people, so I was not prepared at all for any of it. For someone in those shoes that's going in blind to an audition or has never done an accent before, do you have any advice that you can give them to at least get started or be a little more prepared than maybe I was for my first time?
Sure. If you have time, if you know that there's going to be an accent, try to get familiar with that accent a little bit, even if it's just watching a TV show or a movie where somebody is speaking in that. If you don't have time, don't worry about the accent. At the end of the day, the audition is for the director to see how good of an actor you are. And your emotion and the way that you read a line will be is more important by far than whether or not you nail an accent. You can always learn the accent later. If, however, you are comfortable with an accent, then by all means show it off, because at the end of the day, that may give you an edge. It sounds a little contradictory, but I'm sure when you're actually up there on stage auditioning, you can kind of tell if you're ready or not. Pay attention to in the script. So you'll most likely be doing cold reads. Pay attention to the script. If the script has very specific ways of saying something, think about what that is and try to emulate that to show the character that you're looking at. Finally, just kind of be aware that if this is a show that has accents and you are really interested in it, get ready to work on it hard after you get cast. Just kind of be prepared that that's one of the things that you need to do right off the bat.
And that actually kind of leads us into our next question. We talked about some of the tools that are out there, some of the learning tools, but what steps do you take personally, or do you find work for you that to learn that accent once you've been cast and okay, this is the one I have to learn? Do you make notes on the script? Do you change? Do you write things out phonetically? Anything like that you'd suggest?
That's a good idea, definitely. The biggest piece of advice that I can give for that is learn that accent early, even before maybe learning your lines. It's a lot easier to memorize your lines and to have the lines learned in the accent to begin with than to learn your lines in a standard American accent and then try to translate that into British. Now, I understand that you may be, the first week, let's say, you might have to use, you might not be able to use your accent, but while you're doing this, work with that accent. So as an example, one of the properties of the tools that I use talks about resonance, which is where you feel when you're talking, where you feel the noise resonating in your mouth. In an American accent, it happens at about in the middle of your mouth. If you were to be able to poke your fingers through your cheeks, where your fingers would touch in the center of your mouth is where a standard American accent resonates. That's where the sound comes from. When you move towards British, that point of resonance actually moves forward, and it's about right behind your front teeth. So even if you don't put anything else into the British accent, once you know where that resonance is, that really helps to get you 70% of the way there. Understanding that, working that in early to your script. And absolutely, Matt, like you said, if you make notes in your script, especially difficult words, do that. The last thing is just to remember at the end of the day, the accent is a tool. It is just something that is used to add flavor to the story, but it is not the story itself. Listen to your director. The director may say, pull it back a little bit. They may say, they may have specific coaching on how they want you to sound. Take that advice. Of course, the director comes above whatever tool or lesson that you're using because they have a specific vision for how they want your character to sound. So that's kind of the biggest thing. And that includes listening to yourself. And when you kind of get into it, and I actually made this mistake in The Foreigner. So in the second time I got to do The Foreigner was at Bremerton Community Theatre, and I got to play a different character. His name's Froggy. So he's a British army guy, and he has this very much this Cockney accent. And I love Cockney, and it's a little bit more difficult for me to do. So I don't think I'm going to try to show it off here because I'd have to practice it a little bit. But one of the things that I did, and this was actually mentioned in a review of the show, was that my accent was a little too thick. And as much fun as it was to do, it made my lines a little bit harder to understand, and that impacts the show, and not in a great way. So it is always worth taking a moment to think about, am I making myself understandable, or am I just diving too far into the accent?
Strike a balance between believability and becoming a caricature.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
That's especially when you're talking about certain accents like German. It's very, very important to try to get a specific German accent and do not go into the Austrian German. You start doing the Austrian German and you start sounding like a Third Reich, and that's not what you're trying to do unless you are specifically playing a role like that. That's not what we want to do. That's not German. That's a stereotype, and you don't want to offend an entire people that way. So think about what you're doing. Use it as a tool, but do not lose yourself in it.
Well, that's good advice. Really good stuff. Switching gears a little bit. So we talked about watching people do accents in shows and movies and things like that. What celebrity have you seen that does the best accent that's not his or her own?
I was shocked when I found out that Hugh Laurie, House MD, was not American. His accent is phenomenal. In the way that he says it and how consistent it is. It's very, very, very good. Tom Holland, also another one, in his Spider-Man roles, he has a very believable New York accent. And it's very light. You'll notice that if you go back and listen to him in Homecoming, especially when he's talking to the shopkeeper and something from home, it feels natural. And actually, the magazine Wired has a Wired's experts series, and they actually have a dialect coach who does this sort of thing, who talks about specific accents, and he himself mentioned that Tom Holland's was very, very good.
I've noticed that in some films, when folks are doing accents, when they get really emotional, the natural accent sometimes comes through, even if it's just a little bit. And I think I've never noticed that with Tom Holland, and definitely not Hugh Laurie, but you notice it with some.
It's hard.
Yeah,
it's hard because you have your own way of speaking, This is something that you've grown up with and you've lived your entire life with, and to try to change the pattern of how you speak and keep it consistent even when you're trying to have these strong emotions and portraying them on screen. It's difficult. The best students of dialects can do that.
I've always wondered if it's difficult for actors from other countries to learn and perform an American accent, because it almost seems like the absence of an accent. But again, that's a regional thing, because
Very much so.
America is such a mixed place. You've got Southern and New England, of course, and West Coast, I guess, has its own. I've been told
Yes.
that Seattle area people like ourselves, it's almost the most absent accent anywhere. But it's all relative.
It is. And if you listen, it's interesting. The more you think about it, the more you can actually start picking out different areas of the country. So, for example, you'll hear the way certain people, you can tell that they're from LA, or they can, from Southern California. There's definitely a couple of distinctive things that they do. And it's hard for me to do because I haven't actually studied the dialect, but I recognize it when I hear it. So yeah, there's a lot of different places, but all countries have that. All countries will have different dialects of their own language.
Yeah, I mean, there's times when people can tell that I'm from around the Philadelphia area. Certain things I say, certain, phrases, things like that. So interesting.
Speaking of New England accent, we wanted to talk a little bit about what actors have really nailed it, but also some actors that really haven't, as far as their and the first one that comes to mind, which strangely enough is Good Will Hunting. And you've got these two kids from Boston, and Affleck and Damon, their accent to me is just not believable. And I know they're from there, and I just don't know why I can't get over that. It's such a great film, but their accents drive me berserk. Just mute their scenes when it comes on. Skip to Robin Williams. But are there any other movies that stand out where it's like, as great as that person is, really did not get that one?
I really enjoy movies, and again, this is going to date me. I enjoy movies with Sean Connery. He cannot do an accent. I love Hunt for Red October. He's not Russian. And
we were joking about that. We were putting the show notes together, and Sean Connery's Russian accent is the same as his Scottish accent,
Yep.
which is the same as his Irish accent.
Yep, exactly. And it's interesting because the first thing that I thought of when you said that actually is, outside of Sean Connery, do you remember The Fugitive with Harrison Ford?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the big bad guy has this really bizarre, and I believe the actor's name is Jeroen Krabbe. I'm not sure. I'm sorry. I'm butchering his name. He's maybe not, I don't know that he is necessarily a English speaker, but his accent was just bizarre. Like, it's one thing if it's recognizable as he has a little bit of a hint of Austrian or a hint of German. Arnold Schwarzenegger can get away with that thick Austrian accent, and people love it, and they love him. But this guy, just for whatever reason, his accent was very distracting to me in this movie. And that's kind of where my bar is. I don't mind if you're doing a silly accent or whatever, but it's gotta not distract. As soon as it starts distracting from the show, you got a problem.
What celebrity do you think has the greatest accent, the greatest voice? Who would you most like to be cast to do the voice of?
Oh boy. That's a good question.
There's so many.
There's a lot. I really like, and I don't know that I could do it. I love the timbre of Morgan Freeman's voice. And, my voice is down a little bit. It's not nearly where it needs to be. His is so distinct and delightful. I really like his voice. That's tough. That's a tough question, but he's the first one that I think of.
How about you, Greg?
That's a good question. I think I gravitate more towards men with the deeper voices like that, like a James Earl Jones or someone like that. I think there's more. There's power behind those sorts of voices. So yeah, I'd have to almost double the Morgan Freeman kind of James Earl Jones's range, that baritone, leaning toward skewing towards bass.
Well, it's almost a cadence too. Morgan Freeman down here, and it's the way that it's slow. It's just honey.
Exactly.
I got to go with Michael Caine. Everybody's got a Michael Caine. Can you Michael Caine? I'm going to put everybody on the spot. Michael Caine. And everybody's got their own Michael Caine. And Michael Caine even has his own. He jokes about it in some of his autobiographical stuff I've read. He'll do it for people, and they go, no, that's no good.
Exactly. I think of him immediately. His character and the way that he sounds in Miss Congeniality is really the one that pops to me mostly, ironically, for Michael Caine. It's not the Alfred in the Batman series or anything. For some reason, just his, and maybe it's his performance that's included in that, but it's the way that he holds himself and the way that he sounds, that thinly veiled disgust at the beginning of the show, and that moves to a almost reluctant pride that he manages to do with a delightful accent.
Well, we were talking about this. The whole accent thing got me thinking. Probably one of the most talented actors I've seen is in the show Orphan Black. I'm not sure if you guys have seen that. Or Tatiana Maslany played 7-8 clones. So basically the same physical person, but different individuals, and each one had its own accent.
Oh, wow.
And in one scene, I remember she had to play one clone pretending to be another clone. And to do that, she changed the accent enough so that it wasn't exactly the one. It was in between two of them. So she was creating her own accent. Have you ever done that, Adrian, or played around with trying to create an accent that wasn't a specific region or something that's been prescribed?
I haven't. It's a lot of fun. It sounds like a wonderful exercise for a voice actor. I believe that Mel Blanc, who voiced a lot of Warner Brothers characters, Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck.
Almost all of them.
Almost all of them, yeah. But one of the absolute pinnacles of that sort of example was Mel Blanc voicing Bugs Bunny pretending to be Daffy Duck, and then Daffy Duck pretending to be Bugs Bunny. In muddling these, and not even muddling, you could very clearly tell who was doing what, even without any visuals. And that's amazing to me. I have not had a chance to mess with that much, but it would be a lot of fun.
Well, shifting gears a little bit, we referenced in your bio that you have a family of theatrically involved people.
Yes.
And when we did appointment together, all three of us, the first show together, your daughter Anya, who is a junior in high school.
She's a senior now.
Senior, oh my God. She appeared along with us. So what is it like being father and husband to such a theatrically active family?
It's a lot of fun, and you have to have a sense of humor. You have to, because we end up annoying each other and getting a little juvenile. My wife does a lot of eye rolling if we get on a roll, but she understands, I'm sure. I hope.
So when you and Anya work together, do you guys work together on things like accents?
We
hold the book on each other, etc.?
Yeah, we did. We absolutely helped with learning lines together. We didn't have, in Appointment with Death, we didn't have a lot of scenes with each other. In fact, I think we never actually spoke to each other. But that also meant that we could actually practice lines, and I could work her lines and she could work mine, and it worked out very well. It was a lot of fun. It's difficult because it also means that I had to try to be more aware of trying to set an example of certain things that are difficult because we want to mess around, but I can't. I got to lock it down. So I have to try to, at the end of the day, I want to be in a show and I want to be in the next show. So, having to be the parent is necessary. It's not always fun, but it's necessary. But she's such a great kid that it wasn't like it was difficult. It was just, making sure that I was modeling that, listening to the director during notes and paying attention and being there, being present.
Something that she had to do that I remember was work on her voice to appear younger.
Yes.
And almost a little spoiled, just to she was a very erratic character, unstable at times. I guess that's just a voice age as opposed to a dialect accent. Because I remember that was something that Jeffrey Bassett spoke to, was, I need more of this, I need more of that. And it was just to de-age her, essentially.
Yes. And that's a good point. It's something that everybody does, but especially for your first show, you tend to speak more quickly. You'll rush your lines. And so she was nervous about it to begin with. And so she would say her lines more quickly, and everybody does it. And so one of the things that we worked on, not just if you bring your voice up a little bit, then you sound maybe a little bit younger, especially girls can do that and get away with sounding more girly. So she had to do that, and she had to slow down. And one of the things that we worked on, and one of the things that I constantly work on when I'm doing a show, is remembering to enunciate more. And if I feel like I'm going a little too slow, then that feels right because I'll naturally speed up. And then I can trust the director to say, you're saying it too slow if I actually am. So making sure that I enunciate and push it out is just as important. And it also helps me focus more on what the delivery is. And that's all the delivery. An accent is just the way that you deliver your lines for the audience.
Well, I'm lucky enough to work with Mrs. De Groot, and I got to say, your family's a joy to be around. You guys are infinitely talented.
That's
to be very proud
kind of you. Thank you.
So what has been, you've touched on what you've got coming up next, but with COVID hitting and everything shutting down almost, suddenly, what has been your biggest challenge theatrically during COVID?
That's a good question. Not being on stage is I usually, because of scheduling and because of making sure that I balance my life correctly, I usually I'm on stage once a year, usually. It's just been not being able to do a show, not being able to be on stage, and being able to be a part of Shout is great, but that's up in the air, and it's just it's another level of stress. It's something that I can't do. So a lot of us are feeling that. And being able to do things like this definitely helps.
Well, we've learned a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot to digest. Like we said, we'll put those links up so anybody who's interested in learning some of the techniques that you talked about, Adrian, they'll be able to go to those and maybe order some things and learn some accents for themselves.
Absolutely. Well, coming up next, we've got our In the Mix segment. We're going to enjoy a cocktail made by Greg and talk a little bit about the news. So stick with us right here on Heilman Haver. And welcome back to Heilman Haver, the stage and screen podcast. Coming to you this evening from Casa de Quinn Studios with our special guest, Adrian De Groot. It's time for our In the Mix segment, one of my favorites. And this is where our resident mixologist, Mr. Heilman, prepares a special cocktail. Today, in honor of a film that we're going to be chatting about here in a few minutes, and our favorite nutty Irishman, Bob De Niro. Greg, take it away.
Our friend Bob. Yes, so this is the Nutty Irishman. And it's super simple. It's Irish cream liqueur and hazelnut liqueur. So we're using, in honor of our associate producer Quinn, we're using Quinn's Irish cream and mix that with some hazelnut liqueur. It's equal parts. If you're doing a shot, it's 3/4 of an ounce of each. And then we're doing kind of a sipping on the rocks version with just equal parts of both. So cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Y'all, that's delicious.
It is good.
If you're a coffee lover, you're going to enjoy this.
And it's a good dessert drink, too, for after a nice meal or something like that. So the Nutty Irishman, so that's a segue into our In the News topic. We're going to be talking about de-aging technology in film. And over the years, aging characters has been standard practice in Hollywood. It's been done relatively frequently and is comparatively easy to do with makeup and wigs and prosthetics and things like that. De-aging is something that's really been something that's a little bit newer. Previously, it had been done by just casting younger actors in the roles of actors earlier in their lives. So some examples of that, probably the most famous one is our Bob De Niro in Godfather 2, playing the younger version of the Godfather. But we've got a number of examples. Rob Lowe playing a younger Robert Wagner in Austin Powers, The Spy That Shagged Me. Josh Brolin playing a more youthful Tommy Lee Jones in Men in Black 3. In some cases, directors would, throw an 80s wig or use heavy makeup to thin out wrinkles, but largely actors rarely played younger versions of themselves on screen. Well, that is until 2006, when X-Men Last Stand found us looking at younger versions of Sirs Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen. In this film, computers were used to remove some age spots, smooth out wrinkles, and darken hair. But what followed that was an aggressive transition into CGI, or computer-generated imagery, from 2008's Benjamin Button to providing younger versions of Jeff Bridges in 2010's Tron Legacy to Marvel Studios flashing back in a number of films. Robert Downey Jr., Samuel L. Jackson, Kurt Russell. In 2019, Netflix brought us The Irishman, which de-aged multiple characters and is the namesake of our drink. So there are ways in which studios can de-age actors, and they're as varied as the results they have gotten. The first time I saw this done was in Tron Legacy, and honestly, I was blown away. You look at it now, and it may not have stood the test of time, but, you know, when I first saw it, a younger Jeff Bridges, who had, aged significantly from 1982 to 2010, to bring back that 1982 look was, I thought, phenomenally done at the time. But yeah, they're all kind of a bit clunky. Though the exception might be Kurt Russell in Guardians of the Galaxy 2. I think arguably that might be the best one yet. But there's a lot of agreement out there on that. But on the other hand, The Irishman, and we'll talk about that in a bit, has gotten some mixed reviews. And I think, Matt, you've got some take on that.
Yeah, I was really excited for this film, big time, for a lot of reasons. Scorsese, enough said. De Niro working with Scorsese again after some time. Joe Pesci coming out of retirement after a long hiatus and needing to be coaxed out, I guess. The fact that it was a Netflix film, but that was going to obviously be up for Oscar nods. And my favorite, Pacino, working with Scorsese for the first time ever. How that's never happened before, who knows? But just a lot of hype around this film. And I knew that they'd use this technology. And of course, so I was watching for it. And it just didn't go off the right way. I just couldn't get past it. We were joking, but it didn't make Robert De Niro look all that much younger, and it certainly didn't make him look Irish.
Oh, for sure. So we want to get into kind of what does this mean for the future as this technology becomes more pervasive. Robert De Niro said when they did The Irishman, quote, "You just gave me 30 more years of my career." You know, the technology getting better and better, does this mean that actors will be able to play younger roles longer, increasing the length of their careers? But on the other hand, would Godfather 2 be as good with a de-aged Marlon Brando as it was with the Oscar-winning performance of Robert De Niro playing the younger Don Corleone? So what are the wider implications? You can look at some pros and cons. Pros, actors can play a wider range of roles, not limited by age. The death of an actor during a film or series can be mitigated using technology. But on the other hand, as you were alluding to, Matt, physical attributes, walk, mannerisms, things like that appear older can contradict the look of someone. So imagine you watch, a 30-some-odd year, Al Pacino, but he walks like a 70-some-odd year Al Pacino. It just doesn't add up. So, and then finally, robbing younger actors of work. I mean, for example, James Dean is currently cast in a film called Finding Jack. Obviously, James Dean isn't alive anymore. He's been dead for quite some time. He was not able to approve his use of the film or any of the lines or anything related to it. And the film could surely be made using an actor who's younger and frankly alive now to give someone work. But, that looks like obviously something that's a gimmick, being used as a gimmick, but obviously weighing the pros and cons there. So I guess for the group here, for the panel, when is the first time that you saw de-aging in a film?
Well, for me, it actually was The Irishman. And I think there are really two sides to this that are one that doesn't really bother me. If you can get the CGI right, by all means. If you can get the movements right, do it. If it breathes new life in some of these older actors that we'd love to see stick around for a few more decades, like De Niro's joking about, cool. But then you've got this other creepy side where you're bringing the dead back to life on screen without obviously their approval. Maybe their estate gives a nod, but it could be a third cousin twice removed by this point. I was listening to interviews with the folks behind Finding Jack, and they said, we looked around, we looked everywhere, and we decided that the only person to play this role was James Dean. You mean to tell me there isn't one young actor with the swagger and verve that Dean had that you could have cast?
That seems a little bit ridiculous.
Yeah, and not only, I mean, they're hiring somebody to play the body double, so you
Right.
already got somebody. So it's just all about the face.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I feel like, for one thing, if we were still in the older 2000s era, where really everything's being done by bigger studios, and you only have 3 or 4 or 5 big studios who have the money to do this, then it would definitely be a huge concern. The thing that I see counterbalancing this is that now we have a lot of these smaller shops with smaller budgets who aren't going to be able to afford this. Now, I can take this position because I am not an actor, and I'm not doing this for a career, and I'm not going out and auditioning every day. I imagine that this is scary if you're in that situation. But there are opportunities, and you will always find there's always going to be the next big person. And so at the end of the day, if you're good, at the end of the day, if there's something about you, you will be seen and you will be cast. I am not interested in seeing Carrie Fisher, brought back to life, air quotes, because as much as I love the work that she's done, her time is done, and I feel like audiences are smart enough to react to that and say, we want to see what else there is. We have our library of these other actors in their classic roles. I want to see something new.
Yeah, and I think to that point, so you mentioned Carrie Fisher. I thought Michelle Pfeiffer was the other one that I know that had de-aging done in Ant-Man and the Wasp. Again, both big studio pictures that have the technology to do this. But when you look at a younger person playing a younger version of an older character, i.e. Godfather 2 or some of these other ones, you get to experience 2 very good actors as opposed to one actor who's digitally, altered to look younger. And I like having the experience of seeing multiple performances and multiple talents pulling this off than the one that's it's gimmickly, de-aged.
Yeah, and I think that's really a lot of fun for me to see who they're going to cast, and oh man, they nailed that one, and also to see. I mean, it begs the question: if you're going to do a biopic like Rocket Man, well, why don't you just get Elton to do it himself? And I also could go devil's advocate on this and say, well, you have technology to make young actors older. In fact, I recently watched Usual Suspects, and that got me on the topic of Kevin Spacey and his fall from grace. But he was in the process of making a movie about the Gettys, about the kidnapping of John Paul Getty III. All the Money in the World is what it's called. Well, he was cast to play Getty. It took the role away from Christopher Plummer, who they brought in to reshoot all the scenes once they had to ditch Spacey. So you could almost say that it could work opposite. If you got younger, or say Christian Bale playing Cheney, he had to play him through his whole life. Well, they could have cast him as the young Cheney and cast someone older. So I can see jobs being taken away on both ends of the spectrum, but I just don't think the technology is there yet. And I think that's saying a lot, considering how advanced we've gotten in the last, like you said, since early 2000s.
Yeah, I am in my 40s. I've seen this cycle happen several times where, and especially being as you mentioned in my bio, I'm a programmer by trade. So I see and I'm aware of the next big thing. And it's always, there's a lot of discussion about this is the next big thing that's going to kill off this, or it's going to kill off, we're not going to have younger actors anymore. Well, no, I understand the fear of it. It's a valid fear, but I feel like it's going to be borne out that at the end of the day, it's going to be more exciting, and audiences are going to want the new talent to come in. And that's what I want, certainly, as somebody who enjoys film and enjoys this. That's what I want to see. I want to see this talent. And at the end of the day, I'm comfortable with this being used as a tool in the right place. The fact that it is still relatively new, the fact that we're suddenly seeing it, means that we're going to see things like The Irishman, where it's not done as well as we want. And I feel like just the market pressure will cause the studios to tune and tweak when they use it and how much they use it so that we're not going to lose that next big thing.
It's like 3D, I think, too. Any of these new technologies, for a while there when 3D was coming, you had the 3D televisions, you had 3D everywhere, but it's settled down into use it when it makes sense.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Growing pains.
Yes, exactly.
And studios are going to do this. So the question then becomes, and I think we've kind of touched on that, is and maybe a question for you out there in the listener community: do you think they should just because they could? And some of these other questions, we're interested in what you guys think and what when you saw de-aging in film, and if you'd like to see this continue, and some of the questions we asked each other here. The one thing I do want to leave with is kind of a tip. And none of us are probably going to be in this kind of situation where we need to protect our images. But, for some of the actors out there, when you look at what's being known with James Dean, I know that for Will Smith, for example, they did some de-aging in Gemini Man with him. He owns his own image. He owns the rights to his own image explicitly. So anything that's done with his image has to have his consent. But I think actors need to be careful as they move up and become more popular to make sure that they own the right to their basically their own intellectual property. So I think that's one thing that needs to be considered.
A lot of strong feelings out there on both sides.
Oh, for sure.
Definitely. And it'll be interesting to see what they do with Dean, if that actually comes to fruition. So we'll keep our eye on that. Coming up next, we've got our curtain call segment. Got some fun questions for Adrian, and we'll be wrapping the show up. If you'd like to comment or have some thoughts on our topic, the de-aging controversy, hit us up at Heilman and Haver on Facebook. You can also email us, heilmanandhaver@gmail.com, and you can also comment here. We'll be right back with our curtain call segment right here on Heilman and Haver.
Welcome back to Heilman and Haver. Now's the time we kind of have a little fun with our guest in the curtain call segment, kind of a lightning round of questions. Take it away, Matt.
Adrian De Groot is our guest tonight, and first of all, thank you for joining us. We had a lot of fun, and we've learned an awful lot.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
So, first curtain call question. What is the last thing you do before you step out on stage before the curtain goes up?
Well, keeping in with the theme of the show, typically I will, you'll see me kind of shadow box a little bit, trying to get that energy up. And I also have a couple of poems and a couple of things that I will repeat in whatever accent it is, because I tend to do accented shows. To sit in solemn silence on a dull, dark dock, in a pestilential prison in a lifelong lock, and so on. It helps me get into that mouth space, and it helps, for me at least, to cement what I'm saying and how I'm saying it.
Fantastic. If you could direct or act with one person, alive or dead, who would you most like to work with?
This is it's a hard question. I think Robin Williams is the one. It's just, I love so much of what he's done, and it just looks like just a joy to be on set with him. I don't know what he's like to direct, but it looks like it would just be such a blast and such an experience.
If someone was going to make a life of your film, Adrian De Groot, 2 questions. Who would you like to play you? And follow up, who do you think would be cast?
Wow.
Add a little twist to the...
Yes. I have been told, at least when I was younger, I was told that I looked kind of like Hugh Grant. And so I think that would be flattering. I would be worried that they would cast somebody like Mike Myers. I don't know for sure. Again, that's assuming that there's something interesting enough for them to make a show about.
Oh, I have no doubt there would be. The life of Adrian De Groot.
You are too kind,
and
sir.
The De Groot clan. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us. We've had a great time, and we'll definitely have you back.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, gentlemen. A lot of fun.
Before we sign off, we wanted to remind our local theater community out there of another fundraising event happening here in good old Port Orchard, WA. Last time we spoke about Western Washington Center for the Arts, a place near and dear to all of our hearts. We've all worked there. And they're going to be doing another fundraising event coming up tomorrow, Saturday. That is the 17th. And they're having a costume sale. So Halloween is right around the corner. You can come down, find a costume for Halloween. They also, they're going to actually be renting their bigger costume items that are not for sale. And the downstairs area is also going to be open. They still have set pieces, furniture, other items. They have sewing and craft materials. And they're not closing. This is not a fire sale. This is just a fundraising event, and obviously quarantine has hit everyone hard, and another opportunity to come out. The event lasts from 11 until 1 on Saturday, the 17th, right down on Bay Street, 521 Bay Street in Port Orchard. So come on out and support local theater.
And if you do have the chance, if you want to just get a preview of what they have there, Matt and I did a live feed from there when they had their quarantine sale.
Pandemic sale.
Their pandemic sale, yeah. So you could see the set pieces they had and some of the clothing. We apologize for the audio. Wasn't so good. We're still working out some of the wrinkles. But for tonight, thank you to our guest Adrian De Groot and our associate producer A.B. Quinn Heilman. Coming up on our next episode, October 30th, we'll welcome actor-director Becca Ewan, who will share her experience around her love of and her directing and acting in musical theater. We'll add a Halloween twist and talk to her about bringing Rocky Horror to the local stage. Finally, we'll be providing another viewpoint on our discussion from our last episode about the U.S. versus Paramount decision as we talk to Stephen Goodnow, COO of Faraway Entertainment and manager of the Roxy Theater in Bremerton. Until then, join the conversation on Facebook and email us with thoughts and comments at heilmanandhaver@gmail.com.
You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. And if you enjoy the show, make sure to follow us and share the podcast with a friend. Don't forget to join us next time, October 30th. And until we're all back treading the boards together, thank you for supporting local theater and for joining us on Heilman and Haver.